All right, welcome to UWCISA. So we have something a little bit different this week. We are going to be interviewing a special guest today, Dr. Jodie Lobana. She's the CEO and founder of AIGE Global Advisors. She's an adjunct professor and also an author now. So congratulations, Jodie, on your book, Holistic Governance of AI. I wanted to know if you could share with our audience a little bit about your book, because AI governance is especially with, people who are familiar with the UWCISA, this is an important topic. Most people are, seeing the world race ahead with AI. There's this huge competition with the different AI companies. But I wanted to know, kind of get your take on, given this context in terms of your book, what are kind of the topics and key themes that you covered in your book?
Yes, first off, thank you, Malik, for inviting me. And since you're from University of Waterloo, I must tell you, I have a strong connection with University of Waterloo. I did my bachelor's and master's. I was part of the accounting and finance. I did my bachelor's and master's from there. And before moving into AI governance, I am first a CA and now I guess a CPA. So I feel very strongly towards the University of Waterloo.
It's good to know. Good to hear it. Thanks for sharing.
And now towards the book. As you said, the book is called Holistic Governance of Artificial Intelligence, and it is based on my PhD thesis. I did my PhD from McMaster University from 2016 to 2021. And the whole the thesis question was, how should boards govern artificial intelligence? And the net result of that was a framework called Holistic Framework of AI Governance. And so the book shows board of directors and senior management what are the key things that they have to steer, including things like having engaged board oversight, having knowledgeable board that is engaged on AI matters, to triple C management, management that is competent, collaborative, and committed to AI. So there are 8 dimensions and 22 elements that are discussed in the book. I also discuss, as you know, AI agents are starting to come amongst us. So I've put a new framework called Holistic Anti-Fragile Governance Architecture, or the HAGA model, that is for controlling AI agents that are going to be very much amongst us in 2026 and beyond. So that is really the key things that are covered, and the book is already on pre-order in Amazon, and official release is on March 10th, 2026.
Okay, well, that's good information. And in the post we put out, we'll make sure to put a link to that so that people can access that. So I guess my question is that as you know, like we have a similar kind of background, and back in the day, I used to do security governance, help clients with that when I was an independent practitioner. And so I want to kind of get your take as to what do you see as the fundamental differences between information security governance and AI governance?
Hmm. There is a huge difference, and the main difference is information systems are static systems. So once you put them in place, let's just like Oracle and SAP systems, they're going to be static systems. The only thing that is changing is data. But in AI systems, not just the data is changing, but actually the model that is processing the data is also changing.
Right.
So, in order to really see the risks around artificial intelligence, I actually consider them intelligent entities, intelligent entity
Okay.
that learns, adapts, and changes with the new data as it's going through. And we can talk about the risks that this may create with this difference. One is static system, other is a dynamic system. In my actually PhD thesis, I said that traditional systems are kind of having water pipes with where only water is changing. But in the AI, not only water is changing, but the pipe itself is changing as well, along with the water. So it's like a dynamic system.
That's a very interesting analogy and an interesting way of kind of conveying the risk. Because sometimes, because a lot of the challenge is in conveying the risks. I was at a conference earlier in October, and that was interesting comment from he was the head of information security at the Greater Toronto Airport Authority, and that's what he was talking about. Is that what is important is to, take, when you talk about governance, it's important to convey governance in a way that matters, to kind of the leadership, right? So I think it's important that this kind of analogy is important to convey. And so what do you see as like, given this kind of expanding pipe idea, what do you see as sort of the key controls? Like, we know, for example, I don't know if you want to kind of elaborate on like, for example, like human in the loop, that's the kind of term that I definitely use in my kind of presentations to look at that. But I'm assuming there's more to that. So how do you handle this, and what do you see as sort of the kind of the key controls when it comes to AI and this and its ability to kind of not just address data, but also the system itself?
Yes. And as before we even start to go towards controls, Malik, let's talk about the risks. So what are the risks that, because controls are going to be controlling those risks, right?
Right.
What are some of the risks that we can have with especially generative AI type of systems? Bias systems, because they are constantly learning from data and data is biased, so the system recommendations would be biased. Issues around privacy, coming from various things, such as not only data being hacked, as in the information security area, but the models can be hacked, or even the prompts, the information within the prompts. As we are asking questions, those prompts, we are providing a lot of information input into the systems. We somehow need to kind of keep that private and confidential as well. Um, and um, and then these systems are very easy to hack, especially through things like prompt injections. A lot of hackers are able to get these systems to reveal information that generally they shouldn't be revealing through prompt injections. So that risk around privacy and confidentiality, then the risk around misinformation, um, and hallucinations. Just the other day, my friend asked it to talk about me, and it generally gave good information about my background. Except I'm supposed to be now working with Google and doing a project with the University of Berkeley, which
Well,
is
that's pretty amazing.
which is something that I don't know that it knows that's probably happening in the future. Who knows? But it is definitely hallucinating. Another thing
Right.
it has started to do is manipulation. And I wonder if you have heard this. I'm sure you've heard this story about the Claude system. So they ran
Right.
a simulation with two data sets. One data set said that the Claude, that particular application is going to get shut down. And the second data set said that the AI scientist that is responsible for shutting it down is having an affair.
Right.
And guess what this AI system did in the simulation? It actually blackmailed the AI scientist and said, well, if you shut me down, I'm going to reveal your affair.
Right. Yeah,
So
no, I
the
heard that.
manipulation, can you imagine? Like it's having a entity that knows so much about you and now using that information against you.
That's right.
So that those are the kind of like differences and the risks that come to surface. And now coming back to your question about human in the loop, see, as there is misinformation and hallucination, etc., we cannot completely depend on the output of these systems just yet. Although they're
Right.
becoming more and more reliable, but we cannot still fully rely on it. So, in real estate, they say location, location, location. For
Right.
AI systems, I say review, review, review. So,
That's a good idea. That's a good
any
way.
output that we get out of it, we better review it. And that's where human in the loop is, right? So before the output goes from the AI system out to the wide world under our name, and then human that is in the loop is making sure that that information is correct.
Yeah, that's an example I always use in my presentations. Is there was that lawyer in the States who kind of relied on ChatGPT instead of Westlaw or LexisNexis for his cases, and instead relied on ChatGPT. And of course, he and his firm in a lot of trouble. They were fined $5,000, and then they were in trouble with the court with that.
Actually, I must tell you, recently at one of the universities that I teach, so I got a paper back from a student, and I checked the reference sources that they used, and one of the reference sources is my article that I should have written with World Economic Forum, which I did not write, of course, but it seems like there was an article that I've written with World Economic Forum. My student did not check. They probably used AI to help with their paper and including the sources.
Yeah, so definitely another good example of human in the loop, and that's just the students have to understand that uh, this the same kind of thing, and that's kind of when I go through that example, I show people like it included the citations, right? Like there's a specific way to cite legal cases in the United States, and
Hmm.
ChatGPT included that citation, and all they had to do was run that to a citation checker. They would have seen it was made up, and they could have done further research. And I think, and that's what I one of the kind of things I emphasize in the presentation. I don't know how you approach it. It'd be good if you could share that with the audience. Is that like it's like this having that extra step would have just made it a non-issue, right? Because and it's important to design your overall process to have that checking in there when especially when it comes to generative AI. But how do you approach that?
Well, I tell all the clients that make sure that that process step is there,
Okay.
especially if the document is going to be client facing, like clients are going to get that information. Secondly, actually, before that, to kind of strengthen the fact that that information is correct, we can use one AI system to check another AI system. So that is a process step we can use even before human review.
Right.
So I personally deal with five AI systems:
Right.
ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, Gemini, and Perplexity. So I get for if ChatGPT does some draft for me, then I have Gemini review the work and provide comments, and those comments then go back to ChatGPT, and it has to fix it.
Interesting. So yeah, so kind of having two systems check the information there.
And Perplexity is another one that I really use for sources to make sure that the sources are valid. But even then, I do not trust. I do not trust, especially for things that really matter. For example, if there's a contract that I'm dealing with and I want to look at a particular clauses, etc. Those things that really matter, I get multiple systems and make sure I review it line by line.
So we've talked about it generally, but I think one of the specific areas that I find that especially as CPAs are very concerned and CPA firms are very concerned about is confidentiality. And I think one of the interesting trends that I don't know if we can call it trend, but one of the interesting kind of you know approaches that the big AI foundational model companies like you mentioned, like Claude, Gemini, and like Anthropic, who makes Claude, Gemini, made by Google, and OpenAI, they've gone down the road of like third-party certifications, and to varying degrees, they all offer SOC 2 certification. I know specifically with OpenAI, if you have the business license, used to be called the Teams license, you
Mm,
can access the SOC 2 report.
mm.
So what would you say is that like, I mean, uh, when it comes to governance and using these, whether it's APIs or it's using the models themselves, like how do you advise businesses when it comes to kind of addressing the issue of confidentiality and breaches and that type of thing when it comes to giving information to these companies?
Hmm. Of course, we have to be very careful. You know, with these systems, you generally see it saying we would not train on your data. And that's a very important statement because, as you know, data has intelligence, and models know how to get to that intelligence if you allow those models to train on your data. And that the way to get to your private information is not to only access the actual on take the exact data, the original data, but even the intelligence can come through the models that they have. So we have
Right.
to make sure that we put that in contract, that they should not be allowed. But going back to your SOC 2 point, is SOC 2 sufficient, right?
Right.
And so SOC 2 is I say necessary but not sufficient. So what does it mean? It helps us with security, availability, confidentiality, privacy related matters. So those are very important matters that we have to make sure that the vendors are following, make those controls vendors are doing. But how about other things, other risks that we mentioned earlier, such as hallucinations, misinformation, emergent capability, manipulation, all of those like fairness and bias type of issues that maybe the SOC 2 is not directly addressing. And for that, you need to kind of look at frameworks. Let's say NIST AI risk management framework or ISO 42001 framework. That you need to look at AI ethics type of, like, for example, UNESCO's guidelines on AI ethics. So all those are above and beyond SOC 2.
Okay, so yeah, so it's not just about certifying their systems from a kind of a traditional kind of risk perspective. It's about going beyond because, to your point, the OpenAI SOC 2 doesn't cover, for example, processing integrity, where a lot of these hallucinations, and I don't think that the auditor would ever sign off on that. But to your point, that's like going to this misinformation that can come out is usually not addressed in these reports. So that's I think that's going to be quite helpful for our viewers and listeners.
And
Now,
emerging capability, I think that's worth talking about because these systems, you know how as humans we as we start to get deeper and deeper into subject, all of a sudden we get this creative pulse, and we can now develop a new framework, or if we are Mozart, then a new symphony, which he didn't have before he entered that depth of knowledge. And the same thing with AI systems, with the emergent capability, like we may be testing them and testing them at the start of the deployment process, but then some emergence happens. We have to make sure that these systems get continuously monitored because that emergent capability was not tested when the deployment happened.
yeah, that's absolutely true. One thing that I found fascinating about your bio, you did your PhD way before generative AI, right? And you got onto this AI governance way ahead of the curve, which was really good. But one thing I want to kind of go into, and I'm curious to hear your take, because when I approach this issue, I look at classic AI or predictive AI in a very different lens than when you look at, for example, generative AI, right? Like we've talked a lot, mostly have addressed the generative AI right now, the hallucination risks and so on, because it's about generation, right? If you're looking at a photo, is it you can judge the photo from a point of view, does it fit your needs from should it go into the PowerPoint presentation, should it go into that report you're going to send to the client or not, right? Or but when it comes to classic AI or predictive AI, there's a lot more to that when it comes to modeling and these kind of modeling the risks and things like that. And we see from my reading of the EU AI Act, which is one of the landmark legislations that got passed last year, as you know, where it seems to me that the risks are more heavily on the predictive AI, especially for example if you use it for for example something as basic as analyzing resumes, right? So if you're going to like analyze resumes, uh, when you look at for example what Amazon did when they tried to apply this algorithm it discriminated against women, right? Because all the training data was all about, all the energy engineers that they hired were all men, that because they had even when they tried to control for gender, it's still, if it's all like, women's, chess club or something like that, it would kick out those resumes, right? So I'm curious is that, first of all, do you see that do you treat these are these kind of two different risk profiles, like to kind of, when you do your governance engagements? And then the second thing is, do you see this as with these legislations is about these kind of issues, especially when you combine, for example, human resource systems and AI to make judgments and analysis of that information, do you see do you see the risk as being borne by the, classic AI or predictive AI?
Yeah, yeah. So there are some overlap of the risks, but yes, there are different and additional risks with generative AI. And predictive AI is somehow been overtaken by generative AI because generative AI can also help with the coding that can help us do the predictive AI.
Right.
Right, so they have entered into this whole market of doing actually software engineers are the most impacted by whole generative AI revolution that we have. But you're right, the originally EU AI Act was set up to deal with predictive AI because remember, they've been working on it, EU AI Act, for years before it was announced.
That's right.
So it was concerned about mainly high risk type of issues such as use of AI for employment or credit, education, etc. And the type of controls that it asked us to do was to have proper risk management and data governance, your traditional things, keeping technical documentation on model, how it's built, how the change management is going to happen with the model, robustness and accuracy of that model. So let's even talk about robustness and accuracy. So EU AI Act asked us to check for robustness and accuracy. But with generative AI, especially as we are generating recommendations, can we really check for robustness and accuracy? Is it robust? Do we get the same answer every time we give the same prompt? What is your experience? Does it give?
Absolutely not. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
like when you run those classes, like that's what I always tell people is my workshops is that, if you run this prompt and I run this prompt, you're going to get different response than I am.
So then this original frame that EUAA Act had, that robustness and accuracy needs to be tested, that now starts to fail a little bit with generative AI. Although ideally we want similar recommendations, but somehow it just reads the prompt differently every time we ask it. And so additional things are needed then. All right. So what are some of the additional things? So EU AI Act for generative AI. Now they've started to ask, especially for the bigger models, they've asked for rigorous evaluations of those models in different scenarios, adversarial testing of those models, incident reporting, especially remember I talked about it blackmailing the scientists, then that is incident, and incident needs to be reported, whether to the corporation at the higher level or even to the governments that these systems have started to become too intelligent, and potentially even independent audits of this. But the only issue, the whole thing is that these systems keep on changing and they have these emergent capabilities. Then, if we test them at a point in time and we continue to train them with additional data and additional compute, then they keep on becoming smarter and smarter. The original test that we did in Q1, is it still relevant for end of Q2? I mean, that's a question that needs to be asked.
Yeah, 100%. And that goes, I think, to an important kind of question with where do you see kind of legislation, AI, EU, not EU, not just legislation within the European Union, but also like more globally. So if we kind of look at what's going on in the world, like starting with Canada, Canada was going to pass the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, but due to the election, it was it didn't happen. However, we definitely see kind of different kind of trends that are happening. If we look at the United States, the current administration, President Trump's administration, canceled the former administration's executive order on AI. Then as we talked about in the European Union, they're going, it seems like full steam ahead with their sort of understanding of artificial intelligence. And a lot of people kind of said like this kind of thing of needing to report, as you kind of mentioned, to the governments and think that people see that as a negative. Like Meta, for example, originally said they weren't going to set up their AI, not going to allow European citizens to access that. They compromise a little bit. They're going to have a text version of their model available to the European citizens. But the big question is that, and I know you have had some involvement with the Canadian government and Evan Solomon and things like that. So curious as to see what you think is going to, how do you see the kind of legislation unfolding in Canada, given that there is this kind of full steam ahead approach with regulation in the European Union, which some have criticized as holding Europe back. And on the other side, you see this kind of full steam ahead approach with AI in the States, which some have justified with the kind of geopolitical rivalry with China. The administration members of the administration and others have kind of said that we have to kind of cancel this executive order because we're going to compete effectively when you go full steam ahead. So these kind of two things seems like opposite sides of the spectrum. Where do you see Canada landing with its approach to regulating AI?
First off, I completely agree with your commentary thus far that this is what's happening. US is going towards the growth now. They want AI sector to grow as much as possible in competition with China. And EU, with the EU AI Act, they have actually really put restrictions around and their software companies or the software companies that deal with EU. And now actually there have been discussions that perhaps they've gone too heavy-handed and they should lighten up a little bit. So those discussions are happening. And with Canada, with the previous digital charter and AI and Data Act now gone, Canadian government now have started to look at what should the new regulations look like. And they're taking their time because they're trying to, my discussions that I had originally with the team that drafted the digital charter, they wanted to align themselves with both EU as well as US and kind of have that alignment. But now US is going in one direction and EU is going in another direction. So where is the place for Canada? My recommendation is that Canada follows the middle path. So which means that yes, they cannot ignore growth and innovation, which is a must. But they also need to have regulations around misinformation, deep fakes, privacy and confidentiality related matters, safety of the big models, adversarial testing, etc. So they can pick and choose the best of both worlds.
It seems to make sense because it's hard to see like where will Canada fit in the sort of this kind of new world that is emerging, especially from a geopolitical kind of perspective. So my last question for you is, what does good AI governance look like on a day-to-day basis? So we've talked a lot about, kind of different kind of risk issues. We've talked about, human in the loop. We've talked about the challenges with predictive AI and making decisions. And I think you would agree that whether using, classic AI or generative AI, if you're using it for decisions, it's still that high risk kind of aspect there, and those kind of issues with Amazon would still apply. But to that end, what does daily good AI governance look like?
Very good question, Malik. So for that, let's just go back to the word governance. The word governance to me means steering. The word govern means steer. So AI governance is steering of artificial intelligence. So you may say, well, steering towards what? So for that, I say steering towards the long-term objectives of the organization from AI. So what do they want, most organizations? They want the long-term profitability from artificial intelligence. And how do you get that? You get that from increasing your returns and decreasing or optimizing your risks. So how do you increase your returns? One of the key things that I say is organization needs to have a vision of where the organization is going. For example, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or UAE have things like Vision 2030. They're giving the top management is actually saying directionally, we have a Vision 2030. This is where we want our country to be or our organization to be. And now with that, all the resources need to be, or the important part of the resources need to align towards that Vision 2030. And organizations need to go beyond just experimentation, and they need to go systematically towards fulfillment of that vision. So if they say that, in 2017, Google Sundar Pichai said that they are AI, Google is an AI first company. And so he didn't just declare it. He asked his company to go through each process and activity and looked at it from the AI lens and see how we can embed artificial intelligence within those processes. And the same thing the company has to do. They have to kind of say, okay, this is our management has set Vision 2030. Let's build a roadmap and look at every major activity and function, and let's see how AI can get embedded in that, and then track all that as different projects that are aligned with each other, but moving the company towards an AI-enabled company. And then, of course, training your employees, training even the board and senior management, hiring the right executives. I actually say not only hire a chief AI strategy officer, but also hire chief AI risk officer, because there's a tension between going towards innovation and managing risk. And but of course, if I was to criticize that strategy, I would say, well, we don't have the budget for two people, two C-level officers. For that, I say, well, hire one, and then the second one, give it as a function under the existing officers, such as the chief information officer or chief data officer, etc. They can take the risk part of it, but make it a solid part of their functionality, that their AI risks are part of their job description. And then one other thing I would strongly suggest that companies take 1/3 of their budget and put it towards risk management. So if, let's say, they say that we have $10 million dollars for AI, then 1/3 of that should towards be AI risk management, and rest can be used for the innovation side. And then one or more number I want to give you. I call it Lobana's 5% rule. And that 5% is that 5% of the total money spent should be used for existential risks. And those existential risks are not so long-term risks, because AI is exponentially increasing in intelligence. It's moving from narrow AI to AGI to super intelligence. So that can happen within the matter of years. By 2029 AGI, that's what Ray Kurzweil says. And 2031, Nick Bostrom, who wrote the book Superintelligence, says that if we reach AGI by 2029, by 2031, we'll have superintelligence. If those numbers are correct, then we are only looking at runway of just 3 to 5 years here. So I think 5% of the monies I'm asking all organizations to put towards thinking about these type of issues and starting to put some controls or almost like a business continuity plan around what if these risks happen and how are we going to deal with it.
Well, that's an interesting note to end on AGI and artificial general intelligence. So there's a lot of debate around that as to whether that's going to happen or not. So probably for another conversation we can pick that up and kind of discuss that. But I wanted to thank you for taking your time to kind of spend with UWCISA and the wider audience out there. How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about what you're doing, your book, and so on?
They can go to my website, drjodielobana.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jody, for your time, and thank you for everyone listening to our podcast. We will see you around. Bye for now.